Hi everyone. The team has asked me to share some thoughts around my experiences of managing through these uncertain times. And interestingly, as I sit here in Browns Bay in Auckland, New Zealand, which some would say is a paradise part of the world, I must say that it's been a very interesting time to reflect on my experiences in managing organisations through three different really traumatic and dramatic events as they unfolded around the world. They asked me to think of the major lessons that I'd learned through those processes. So I'm not here to tell anybody the best way to run their business or the best way to do things. I certainly don't pretend to be any expert, but hey, since they asked me, I thought I would share the learnings that I took, and certainly the learnings that I'm putting into play day by day and week by week at the moment. Lesson number one for me is about staying calm and being unemotional. As cold as it might sound, during these times, for me, the best thing to do is to be undistractable and uninfluenceable by emotion. I think consistency in your responses and predictability, and also this aspect of being very, very consistent and unaffected by the announcements that might be sad or dramatic or in some cases really quite devastating to either you personally, people around you, or the business. It's really, really important to stay calm and to stay level. Lesson number two for me is about the fact that you can't do anything like this by yourself. And in these crisis situations, you very, very quickly need to identify the people that you need around you to do the jobs that you can't do, and assemble that team as fast as you can. Give people roles, take people out of their normal day-to-day positions, give them a role, give them a title, make it clear that everything else they're working on right now takes second priority to managing the situation that you've asked them to be a part of. Ensure that their managers know and fully endorse that their availability is 100% first called on by the team that is managing the crisis in the organisation. Lesson number three for me is about being data driven. It's really important that you understand the metrics and the data points that are going to drive your decisions around things. Sometimes those decisions can be quite far reaching. They're a yes or they're a no. Are we going to do this? Do we feel like we've achieved a level of safety for our staff? This certainly came to fore for me during the Christchurch earthquakes, where we had some very clear criteria about at which point we would decide to shut the building down and evacuate our staff to a different location. Some of you might be aware that during the Christchurch earthquakes period, there was a large earthquake, but that didn't cause a lot of damage or death, and there were aftershocks, lots and lots of aftershocks, and buildings and people and houses were being affected and in some cases damaged further and further during this period. And there was this real sense of how many more aftershocks can this structure take. And we felt that for our building and our premises in Christchurch, that we decided there was a metric that would be given to us by the engineers who assessed, and if the building fell below a certain score of stability that the engineers would give it every time they visited, then we would evacuate the building. And we agreed that every time there was an aftershock that was greater than a certain magnitude, we would call the engineer back out again for another assessment. What that meant was that we could make totally unemotional decisions about when the building was going to be evacuated. Now, of course, if something had happened that would cause us to change that on the fly, we would have reacted. But often in these times, like we are right now, when do you tell your employees that they need to work from home? When should you let them carry on working? We decided that our benchmark or our data point was going to be to follow absolutely the guidelines of the governments and the jurisdictions we operated in, not to do more than what the governments were doing, and certainly not to do less than what the governments were doing. But initially we'd thought we might want to do more, and what we felt was that put us in a precarious position of having to explain to people, why did we choose that more? Why were we not doing something else more? So even though we made one decision that was more, pretty soon after that we pulled back and we sat very, very, very closely and tightly to the government announcements and the government guidelines that were given out. Really important to establish your data and your data points that you're going to use to drive your decision making. And I know that there was an example the guys have explained in the narrative around the tsunami incident on Boxing Day, which was a few years ago, and we used the same approach, or I used the same approach. Lesson number 4 is about sticking to your communication ceremonies and schedules. Some of you who know me will know that I'm an exceptionally busy person, and I hardly ever arrive on time to meetings, and a meeting that's supposed to be 20 minutes, if it's got LMH involved, will generally take more than 20 minutes. And so I'm not a great timekeeper. I try and cram as many things into a day as I possibly can. What I've learned during these crisis times, and when you're leading a team and a business through crisis, is that you have to stop doing that. You have to stick to the timeframes. You have to stick to the ceremonies. If you tell your staff that you're going to communicate at a certain time, you communicate at that time, because you give them then an assurance. You give them, again, that consistency and that structure that they can rely on. If you can't get something prepared by 4 o'clock, you make sure that somebody, especially if you're in a meeting still discussing the topic that you want to communicate about, you just ask somebody on the side if they could let everybody know that the update's been delayed and something's coming, but the update still goes out at 4. I found it's really useful to also create logos or brands, internal brands or personas for the various types of communication that are coming out. And even things like consistent subject lines are really, really important. Get into a syntax or a way of communicating that people can learn to find in their email inbox. Their muscle memory of their eyes is looking for the communication that's in a particular format. They can start to separate out the urgent stuff and the regular stuff themselves. And on that, use email, don't use Slack. We use Slack for lots of what I call temporary communication. It's not permanent, and you need to be able to put a message on Slack, send an email out, and then of course back that up with a library or a curated sort of list of assets that you've sent out over time, so that people can go back to it and refer to it later. I think it's really, really important that no matter what time zone you're on, no matter where your people are, that you stick to these kind of ceremonies and time zones, and you create consistency for people. Communication. You can never under communicate in these circumstances, but what you can do, because everybody else is over communicating, is you can make it easy for your message to cut through. And that's a really key thing here. It's not about whether you did a great job communicating, it's whether you did a great job ensuring that your message was received by the other person. So you should be really focused on that. Lesson number 5 for me is about keeping a daily record or a journal or a diary of everything that goes on during the crisis, because you never know when you need to go back to it. Often your decisions and your thought processes and the things that you agree to with people in conversations need to be audited later. So act up front like it will be audited. Keep an open desk notepad or a physical pad, and take a note of the things that you are doing, the decisions that you're making, so that you can refer back to them. Go to meetings with agendas. Make sure somebody in the meeting is keeping minutes. Those things are crucial. You need to store them. You need to refer back to them later. And when there's a lot going on, people really, really appreciate action lists. Everybody's pretty committed to doing what they said they're going to do, but most of us forget 1 or 2 things out of a meeting. So having a really clear action list with accountabilities and who said they were going to do something is important. I had an example in Christchurch during the earthquakes where we had made a verbal agreement with a number of staff about rehousing, rehoming them during the period where there was a lot of damage to houses. And what we forgot to document as clearly was the period of time under which we agreed that we would cover their accommodation costs. Now, we sorted it all out. It wasn't a drama, but it was one of those things where the right decision was made at the time, but we didn't document it fully, and you need to be able to document these things so you can go back to them. I do keep an open file, an open Google Doc in my desktop every day now. And all I do is I go in there at regular intervals every hour, and I try and capture the things that have happened in that hour. It also serves as a really good break sometimes from the busyness of everything going on, just to take that 2 minutes to stop at every hour and go and reflect on what's happened and type a few notes. Trust me, I don't think those notes are going to be easily consumed by anybody else until I've run spell check over them, but they're there nonetheless. And the last lesson, this is the final lesson, and it's a lesson in practical terms and I suppose metaphorical terms as well. Keep your water topped up. I've got a roster currently with my leadership group at Unleashed, and that's because during the day and during the day that extends into our UK daytime, I'm running point on most of the things that are going on. What that means is that when we get to Friday night UK time, I need a break and I have to tag out in the weekend. So I've got a colleague who steps in, who's been shadowing me in and out during the week, and they pick up, and I get a break during the weekend time. Of course, if something crucial happened, I would be re-engaged as was required. But it's to force me to take a break, and it's really, really important. So make sure you've got non-work people around you to support you for your well-being. A number of my friends and family know the role that I'm performing in the business at the moment. They know to let me get on with it. They know not to ask, how are you? But they also know from time to time to check in with me and just make sure I'm doing the little things like, did I have a meal break today? And did I make sure I had some exercise? So make sure your friends and family know where you're at, and they will figure out how to support you and your well-being emotionally and physically best. And I suppose last of all, actually on a practical level, keep the water bottle well stocked up. This water bottle has been with me for about 14 days now because I've been in self-isolation for a while. And I don't have anybody, unfortunately, to top it up. If you're in a work environment, call on a couple of close colleagues and ask them. It's a transparent bottle deliberately. I learnt this some years ago, all the way back in House of Travel time and then through the time that I was working at Black Bay. If this bottle's transparent and it gets near empty, somebody will go and fill it up for me, which is an amazing thing for me. And I'm very well hydrated, and my pee has never been as light as what it is at the moment, which I'm sure will have some long-term benefits. So that's it from me. I'm hoping that some of this might be helpful for some of you, and kia kaha, and I hope you stay well in these challenging times. Thank you.